everybody's doing it. Nobody's catching it. So is it really cheating if everybody's doing it? Probably, but you feel better about it because, I'm not the only guy cheating. Everybody else is cheating too. So we're all doing it. And
I love the idea that some dude, you picture him with a pocket protector and a slide rule and like really thick glasses. The first year, he's like, aha. He sits down and just types up the rule and he's like, got him. The next year, and he's like, oh, wait. And then he finds out that he has to write more mirror rules and it's like just steam starts coming out of his ears. All right. Welcome to It's Not the Car. We're a racing podcast. We're a racing podcast about people, or maybe we're a people podcast about racing. I can never remember. I'm Sam Smith. I'm a journalist and a club racer, and I have a new book out. It's Stories and Secrets and Humanity from the last 20 years of car riding. I've told you about it before, and we don't need to really rattle on about it, even though I probably will and almost just did. Never buy that book. It will damage your brain. Jeff, who are you?
Hi, I'm Jeff Brown. I'm the competition director at AWA Racing, and I'm currently reading Sam's book. I'm trying to point to it here on YouTube. It's right there behind me. It's an awesome book.
I wondered what you're doing with your finger.
I'm trying to get it lined up there. But
I thought that was just a random spasm. Go on, sir.
No, that was Sam's book right there. You can see it if you're on YouTube. Otherwise, if you're not on YouTube, just go out and buy it. It's awesome. I'm loving reading it. But when I'm not reading Sam's book, I'm work on the AWA Corvettes in IMSA and try to help make them go faster.
Okay. So our third host, the great and powerful racetrack wizard known as Ross Bentley, he's not here this week. He's off coaching somebody at a racetrack in Watkins Glen in upstate New York. But that's okay, because when Ross isn't here, I get to go full rabbit hole tech nerd with Jeff. And those are some of my favorite days in the history of time, which is why today's show is... this is really interesting. The format is something we call Jeff Shares a Secret. And today, that secret is, well, what I have written in the all-knowing spreadsheet that runs this show and determines all of our lives and determines whether our producer Mike lives or dies. That cell reads, cheats I have seen. And a cheat is something you do to outrun the competition that they don't know that you're doing. Now, racing has had cheats in it since the days of Spartacus and chariots. And I wanted to talk about this in this episode because good and effective cheating it's usually the result of intense creativity. And nobody is more creative than someone whose job is on the line to deliver under intense pressure. And that's basically pro racing in a nutshell, with the cool aside that most of the cheats that happen in pro motorsport don't often come out. They don't get revealed until years later, usually because there's jobs and money and corporate sponsorships and backing and 1,000 other things on the line. Now, so Jeff has been an engineer, a racer. He's run pits and teams and won more pro races than I've ever seen. He's done that for decades. And so before we kick this off, he and I were talking about the types of cheating, which is a cool thing in itself, because how racers cheat, that actually breaks down into a bunch of different categories, which is amazing, because most people really only think of it like, oh, he cheated and he went faster, as if, cheating is one solid monolithic block of a thing. So the way we're going to do this is Jeff's going to run down the categories, and then we're going to tell one story that he's met from each. Jeff, want to kick it off?
Yes. There's something wrong if there's degrees and categories of cheating, probably. It's not like, anyway.
Hi, I'm Sam. We make this show because we like it, but also because it keeps our young producer Mike off the street and away from a life of crime. If you want to help both of those things happen, you're in luck. We have this thing called Patreon. For a few bucks a month, you get to help support the show, but you also get some neat perks like monthly bonus episodes. The money we raise through Patreon helps keep this show on the air. If you like what you're getting here and want to help us keep doing it, that'd be great. If not, that's fine too. We like you anyway. You're here. We're glad. Join at patreon.com/notthecar. Back to the show.
Let's talk about those three things. I think there's three kind of areas of cheating. There's the number one, blatant, outright cheating, where nobody would say, oh yeah, it's a gray area, or oh no, I can see how they did that. No, these are the ones where it's just like, Yeah, they spend a lot of time and money and effort to violate the rule 100% with no trying to shield it or anything other than trying to hide it so nobody sees, including your competitors. And so that's the blatant cheating. That's category one. Um, Nobody really likes that, but it happens. And so category two is kind of what I call creative interpretation of the rules. It's the rules out there. You read the rule book and you go, ooh, but I could do this or I could do that. Or it doesn't really say you can't do that. I know what they want what the spirit and intent of the rule is. They want you not to do that, but it doesn't say you can't do it exactly this way. So I'm going to interpret that rule creatively and do something to my car or something in the race or something like that. So that's kind of a less blatant cheat. It's still probably, the rules makers didn't want you to do that, but they didn't do a good enough job writing the rule to prevent you from doing that. So there's that second category. And then the third one, and this happens a lot, and some people even talk themselves into this, but it's cheating. It's definitely cheating. You're not supposed to do it, but everybody you're racing against is doing it. So you feel dumb not to do the same thing because you're going to get beat by these guys. Everybody's doing it, nobody's catching it. So is it really cheating if everybody's doing it? Probably, but you feel better about it because, well, heck, I'm not the only guy cheating. Everybody else is cheating too. So we're all doing it. And so that's the third category. I know everybody else is doing it, so I'm going to do it too.
What's interesting about all of that is that we're talking about something that is, no matter what you do, the intent is to take an ostensibly fair playing field. And no playing field is ever fair, right? No ounce, no matter what anybody tells you, no spec class, no electrically controlled karting that you get at the mall, none of it, nothing, no racing in motorsport is ever fair. But the intent is to take that relatively lumpy but ostensibly level playing field and lumpy it up even further. And that's against it. It's odd because it's both, and it always has been. This is always how people have looked at it. It's both against the spirit of competition and against the spirit of fair play, and yet quietly encouraged in a sense that we look at the people who are deeply clever, who've pulled off something that nobody else has done, and we applaud it until they go too far. So let's go back to that first category, because it's always about the motivation and it's always about the reasoning, where someone looks at a moment and looks at an opportunity and goes, well, I shouldn't do that, but I'm going to. And that first category is the blatant category, that it's not allowed, you're trying to get away with it, and you hope you don't get caught. So what's the first thing that comes to mind? What's the story that's on the tip of your tongue thinking about that stuff?
Probably the one that comes to mind is one that I was conflicted on how I felt about it. At first, there was no conflict. This car beat me, and I was mad, and I didn't know how they did it. And a lot of people they get beaten. They like to use the excuse, well, they're cheating. And more often than not, they're not. You just didn't do a good job and they beat you. But sometimes it becomes obvious that they were cheating and you're not sure how. So this was a race for me. This was a great example of it. And I got to give the team, they were really clever. They almost got away with it. And they only made one little mistake to get caught. A Grand Am race. So I was running the Ferrari 333 against the Riley Mark IIIs that were owned by many teams. Many teams had those. There's probably 10 of them in the race. And as a lot of endurance races come down to a few mileage.
Wait, what year so this was mid 90s? What year was
95.
This?
I'm pretty sure it was 95. We were racing in Canada on the island. Why can't I think of where it was?
It's on the tip of my tongue. I know this. Why do I not know this? Anyway, you're racing.
Racing in Canada.
Yeah.
And we're and it, like a lot of these races, it comes down to like the last pit stop being the shortest, or can you make can you make enough fuel mileage to not have to do the last pit stop or whatever? So we're out there running and we're doing our thing and we're saving fuel and we make our pit stop. Like we think we've stretched it pretty long, about as long as anybody can. 2 or 3 other cars stop within a lap or two of us. And we're like, okay. And this one car, Riley Mark III with Buick engine probably. Anyway, keeps going. And it goes another lap. And it goes another lap. And it's gone like 5 or 6 laps longer than anybody else. And everybody in the pits are like, there's no way. It's impossible. You couldn't save that much fuel. And you start to doubt yourself. Well, maybe the driver is just amazing and maybe he's just, I don't know how they did it. And but this was too much. If they would have gone 2 or 3 laps, 2 laps, you would have gone, oof, that was pretty good. But they went 5 or 6 laps longer than everybody else. And that's just impossible. What's funny about this now, I was just trying to think, I don't even remember. I think we might have won the race ultimately. No, maybe I don't even remember because this is faded. The cheating story faded my memory the whole weekend. This is what I remember about it. I can't even remember where it was anymore. It was in Canada.
So they went long, and the implication there is that they found some way, because in racing, every stint is dictated by how much fuel you have, how much you use that fuel, and that there's not a lot else, right?
Right.
They went long, the implication being they somehow had more fuel in the car, right?
Right. Well, bigger fuel cell, because the fuel cells were limited in size, liters, to how much gas you could hold. Because, and so everybody had basically the same amount of gas. So if a car went 5 laps longer, okay. If it went 2 laps longer, your driver's really good at saving fuel. I get that. That can happen. 3 or 4 laps longer, he must be Scott Dixon on steroids saving fuel, just like almost impossible. 5 or 6 laps longer, something is out of whack here, completely out of whack. And so they did that. End of the race, it was so obvious, even the officials, none of us had to go up to the officials yelling and screaming, you need to check his fuel cell. You need to check the size of the fuel cell. We didn't have to do that. The officials went, whoa, that's impossible. We're going to check that fuel cell. So they take the car apart. They take the fuel cell. Fuel cells have a big hatch on the top of it, a big plate that comes off of it where you can reach your hands in there to get at the fuel pumps and stuff like that. So they do their standard fuel cell check. They make the mechanics take the hatch off the top. They look in there and they make sure there's no fuel in it, that it's completely dry. They make you even drain out your fuel lines and everything. So the car is dry. Then close it up and they make you fill the car from the fuel rig, and it fills up the car to the top. And officials are standing there monitoring everything. There's no sleight of hand or magic tricks going on. It's real. Fill up the car. They pump the gas out, and the car's 100% legal. It has a legal fuel cell. It has no more gas in it than it's supposed to have. And people are like, how did that happen? That's impossible. And the officials are like, all right, take the fuel cell, take it apart again. And somehow, and I don't know how this happened, but somebody noticed something didn't look right inside the fuel cell. And if you know what a fuel cell is, basically the aluminum box of a chassis, and then there's a ballistic fabric rubber bladder inside of it. Think of like a thick balloon.
Like a bag, yeah.
Bag. And when you pour the gas in, it kind of expands to fill the cavity that the bag is in. And so, and I don't know exactly how they found it, but what they found was super clever. Between the bag and the fuel cell cavity, they had put a metal plate, let's say about a 1 foot by 1 foot square metal plate. And attached to the middle of it was like a big bolt. That big bolt went into an electric motor. so that when the electric motor was activated, the plate pushed against the bag,
You're kidding.
making the bag smaller. Space. The space was smaller because this
Yeah.
plate pushed, like it would be like taking a balloon. Think of a balloon that you're holding, and it has a certain amount of space in it, right? But if you take your fist and push in on one side of the balloon, the space inside the balloon is smaller. That's
And if you,
exactly what this plate did.
for those who don't know, fuel cells are they're essentially constructed and designed to not burst in an accident, right? It's a way to have a container of fuel that if the car crashes or something happens or you get hit by a meteor, it just deforms. It contains the fuel in it and it doesn't, ideally go all over you, the car, catch fire, yada, 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 right? So that the fact that just the fact that you could use the main ability of the thing, what it was designed to do, to cheat with it. So how did you would do that? Why? I guess the question is, why would you do that and not be careful with it? Why would you take it and blatantly go past everybody else? Why not take it to like 3 laps or 3.5 laps? Why 5 or 6?
That's a good question. I mean, that was their downfall. If they would have done 2 laps, nobody would have, or 3 laps, nobody would have really noticed. Because what they did is they would start the race with that plate all the way back. So the fuel cell holds, and I don't know the exact numbers, 110 liters of gas.
Okay.
And then they would run the whole race that way with 110 liters so they could go long. And then on the cool down lap, the driver would push some hidden or flip some hidden switch under the seat or something like that. And the motor would go and push that plate forward. And then when they filled the tank with gas, it only held 100 liters. And the officials went, oh, it's a 100-liter tank. It's legal. And then they would push the button and switch the other way. And now it's 110 liters because the plate would come back. So they got, I don't know. I don't know why they went too long, but that was the tip off. It wasn't somebody saw wires, heard some motor, or there was you wouldn't have been, it was really well done. Really, I was impressed.
It's like the old line about, most lies, what gives away most lies isn't the lie itself. It's always the person doing the lying, right? Somebody screws up, you can't sell the story well enough, like whatever it is, the notion that it's never ever the thing that you're doing that makes it obvious that you're doing that thing. It's the fact that deep down, you're just a little too greedy. You tack that extra time on, or you can't. So what's it like in the rest of the paddock when when somebody's revealed as doing something and it's both, like in that case, intensely smart and clever and also intensely stupid because of the way they execute it? How do people react?
The first reaction is you think back to all the races you lost to that team and you go, oh. And most people use it as an excuse. You probably blew it yourself. You didn't drive good. The setup was terrible. You did bad strategy. But if you lost to that team, now you have an excuse. Oh, yeah, no, I was great. And they cheated before, too. Unfair, but that's the first reaction. The second reaction is, and this is probably the secret reaction, is, damn, that was good. I wish I would have thought of that. And the third reaction is, uh-oh. Yeah, they're watching this stuff. We better make sure our stuff is really clean and right to the letter of the rule and everything else. Nobody thinks they're the world's worst guys or anything like that because we're all competitors, right? I had a team owner one time that was a highly successful team, and the team owner told me, he goes, Jeff, we race the rule book. And that was his approach. We race the rule book. And every good team looks at it, because if you're not pressing that, it's just like trying to get the last little detail of a setup or an apex or a brake zone or whatever. You're doing that with the rule book because that's one of the restrictions from going faster. So you're pressing it right to the end as hard as you can.
I love the evolution in how people look at cheating and how people look at bending the rules and what everybody else is doing as you do more of this, right? You mentioned earlier the first knee jerk being like, well, they won. Well, clearly something was happening, but the more the more your knee jerk is, well, look at what I'm doing and figure out what's wrong with it because there's clearly somewhere I'm screwing up. But when you start out, I can remember really early in my club racing days when I first started doing this stuff, I'd look at somebody that was massively quicker on a similar car, on a similar tire, on a similar day, and not understand it. My knee jerk would be, well, okay, clearly it's my fault. And then there'd be a beat, and it's like, no, it's like the old Simpsons joke. It's the children who are wrong. Everyone else is screwing up. Clearly, everyone else here has a double oversized motor, and they're on a whole bunch of speed that day, and everybody's running on rocket fuel, and there's 1,000 other reasons why it can't happen, and it's not me.
Yep.
But then every pro engineer, racer of any sort, driver that you talk to, the deeper you get into your career, that it's a different kind of unsure. You get to the point, it seems like everybody gets to a point where they're like, well, something's going on here, and I've gone through all the answers I've got. I don't know what it is, and it's not one of my answers, and I'm pretty sure they're doing something spooky, but I don't know what it is. But it's also possible it's not me. Like, it's a different kind of being unsure, right?
Right.
You
Right.
know what you don't know, and that's almost worse than not knowing.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's those things are those blatant ones. Category 1
Yeah.
is those are tough because you have no defense. They can't say, "Hey, we found this metal plate with this screw in this motor." And you can't say, "Yeah, but the rules kind of, I read the rule like this." No, you're not. You have no. There's not even a shred of defense. All you can say is, "Yeah, you caught me." And those are really tough. We've you and I talked about not talking about this, but
Yeah.
the old Penske push-to-pass thing that just recently happened. It's one of these. It's like there's no defense. It just
Right.
You got me. And so this fuel cell one was one of those. And those are hard to. I mean, you have to. I don't know. I don't think anybody in racing really likes those, and really, those aren't the fun ones. Those are I just cheated. Those. There's the fun ones are category 2 and 3. Those are the ones that are actually fun.
But that's an interesting. It's fun to use that word, right? Because there is this, like I said earlier, cheating has been a part of motorsports since the dawn, or cheating has been a part of competition since the dawn of time. But racing has this unique relationship with it because it's always been tied to motor racing has always been tied to a certain amount of doing your best and a certain amount of attempting to drive and operate and engineer and build the car better than anybody else, but also there's this light undercurrent of respect for somebody who figures out something first, or even just figures out a way around something that nobody else has. So you mentioned the Penske thing, the push-pass scandal. For those who don't know, Penske, literally Roger Penske, the man who owns the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, his team was found to be using the push-to-pass button illegally at times when the series had turned it off. There's a button in IndyCars. When you hit it, you get, I believe it's just extra boost, right? Boost and programming.
Yep, I think some RPM.
Yeah. And that's radio controlled by the sanctioning body. And there are periods when you're allowed to use that, and drivers can choose to use it to pass at a certain moment or not. And there are periods when it's turned off. And Penske had figured out a way. We don't need to go into how. It's really interesting if you have the time to Google it. But Penske figured out a way to, either intentionally or not, the thinking is, how do you not do this intentionally? But they had figured out a way to make that accessible when the series had turned it off. And that touches on this complex relationship the sport has with the notion of breaking the rules. We talk about people like Smokey Yunick from the 60s and 70s, a guy who, famously was known for building subscale Trans Am cars and hiding, running larger fuel lines to hide an extra gallon or 5 of fuel in the car beyond what would fit the tank. And that's the kind of stuff that we point to and go, man, that guy was amazing. He was crazy. He was a total genius. And yet there's a line. And when you cross that line, like with the Penske push-to-pass thing, everyone knows it's there and everyone is disappointed. There's a reputational hit. There's something different about it. It's like that old line about pornography, right? You don't know where that line is, but you know it. You know it when you see it. It's hard to define. But
exactly. And that's why the creative interpretation of the rule ones, those are, I think most people in racing enjoy that, because especially if you get in with a sanctioning body that understands that. I've had situations where I've done things either from a strategy or on track or even technically, where they've seen it, they've looked at it and went, no, you can't do that. And they pull out the rule book and they go, well, yeah, I guess, yeah, that was really good. And they give you credit. They're like, good one. That was great thinking. And then they'll go back and change the rule. And that's another thing. It's a kind of a badge of honor. All race engineers and chief mechanics and team owners always like they'll read the rule book and they go, yeah, that's my rule right there. That's my rule. Everybody likes to have a rule written because they were clever enough to come up with something that nobody else had thought of. And then they wrote a rule to prevent that. Cool. You don't do it anymore, but that's your rule.
Is there a Jeff rule? Do you have any Jeff rules?
Fortunately, I do.
I feel like that's a segue.
That's a segue too. So let me do two at Indy. Showed up Indy 500. You're going to ask me what year? Must have been 94, 95-ish area, I'm thinking.
Okay.
Anyway, we're going to qualify for the Indy 500. And we're at Indy. I don't know if they do it anymore, but they used to set up the tech plate where you had to roll across the tech plate and get inspected before qualifying in the middle of pit lane. So you'd roll across the plate, get inspected, it would roll off the plate, and then you were in the line to line up to qualify. And there was officials around the car, so you couldn't touch it after it went off the plate. So I show up at the tech plate with no mirrors on the car. They had these tiny little mirrors. Everybody's seen them. That hang off the cockpit. Back in the day, they do just one bolt through the side of the tub, and the little mirrors, wing mirrors, kind of hung off the side. And I'm like, well, heck, we're qualifying. I'm thinking we're qualifying. There's nobody going to be behind us. What do we need to look backward for? And it's got to be drag, right? You got these mirrors sticking out. You got to slow the car down. I don't know how many miles an hour or tenths of a mile an hour. I don't care, but it can't be better. So I took the mirrors off. We roll through qualifying to the plate, and the Indy inspection guy looks at me and he looks at the car and he goes, hey, you don't have any mirrors on there. I'm like, nope, we don't. And he's like, but you have to have mirrors. And I said, well, I don't think so. And he whips out his little pocket rule book, USAC, it was USAC back then, rule book, and he goes, oh yeah, you don't have that. Huh. All right. So we went down and we qualified. Next year I come back. Oh, then there was a rule. Next year I get the rule book and it says, mirrors must be on the car at all times. I'm like, oh, man, got me. So I go back the next year and I think, on the car at all times, on the car at all times. Didn't say exactly where they had to be, just on the car.
Jeff, I love you to pieces. So, where is this going? Where did you put them?
So I took the mirrors, you know how they picture the cockpit and the side, like right about where your hands would be on the steering wheel. If you took your hands off the steering wheel and moved them outboard, that's where the mirrors would be sticking out on the outside of the car. I took the mirrors off and put them on the inside of the car, put the bolt through the outside, and the mirrors were in over the driver's hands.
Which, all things told, is probably only about, 10% less useful than they would have been outside the car, because mirrors at Indy are famously useless. But
right, exactly.
So how?
So I roll across the tech plate, and the same guy goes, aha! He goes, we wrote a rule, you have to have mirrors. I said, I do. And he goes, I don't see the mirrors. I pointed inside the car and looked in there, and there were two mirrors were sticking like at the steering wheel. And he's like, yeah, but they're... And he pulls out the rule, and I said, it says you must have mirrors on the car at all time. And he goes, damn it. All right. So we go and qualify with the mirrors on the inside of the car. And he was fair about it. He wasn't like, and I knew what the spirit and intent of the rule was. They wanted them where they're supposed to be.
Sure.
Well, the next year there were, I'm probably exaggerating, but there were like 4 pages of mirror rules. It was like, the mirrors must be on the car in the normal thing, providing a clear and unobstructed view of the rear of the car with glass of this minimum dimension of this. There was lots of rules. And I didn't have the energy to try to beat that one
I
the
love,
third year.
I love the idea that some dude, like you picture him with a pocket protector and a slide rule and like really thick glasses. The first year he's like, aha. He sits down and he just types up the rule and he's like, got him. The next year and he's like, oh wait, and then he finds out that he has to write more mirror rules and it's like just steam starts coming out of his ears.
Right.
Did
Right.
it? Did it end up? How much do you think? I mean, right? Indy, everything matters. They spend weeks taping up bodies and doing body
Right.
fit for the 500 because it matters. Drag counts. I made a pun. There's a joke in aerodynamics we'll get. Drag counts.
Drag
Aha.
count.
How much do you think pulling the mirrors off that car gained you, if anything?
There's a I don't know. We didn't do it in practice because there could have been cars behind them, and we weren't big on spotters back then. And so we're like, we never tried it. I don't know. It's I kind of went by the quote, and I'll probably butcher it here, but I think it was Bill Belichick, the coach, that said, "We're going to try to find an advantage wherever we can. We don't know. We don't care how small the advantage is. We're going to exploit it." And it was kind of that kind of a thing. It was like, it's got to be better. Is it going to make us the difference between pole and fourth row? Probably not. Are we really going to notice it? I don't know, but it couldn't be worse. So we did it.
I love this category because this is where, and you could almost make the argument that it's not cheating, even though it kind of is, even though it kind of isn't, right? But this category is where stuff like Penske acid dipping the Trans Am Camaros to the point where
Right.
the roofs were virtually transparent, things like that.
Yeah.
This is where all the fun stuff lives.
Exactly.
And it's where everything you find in it, like you want to applaud, and that nobody's going to look at it and go, you're a son of a, because you did it. They're going to be like, you're a son of a, because
Right.
you did it.
Right.
How
people like that.
What's it feel like when you get away with it, when you discover something like that and you punch that button? Because before we started taping this, we were going over the list of things that you're just rattling off stuff through your career that you had seen, and you've been a part of a lot of these clever looks around the rules. What does it feel like when you figure out that you can do something and you figure out that they can't do anything about it?
You would think that would be, I guess, something special, but it really isn't. It's no different than figuring out that the stiffer front anti-roll bar was better than stiffer front springs. It's just another, okay, that helped. Okay, that's an improvement. Okay, that gave my team a little advantage. Okay, it's no different than figuring out a better choreography for a pit stop. Like if that guy runs there and the tire handler comes in from the front rather than the back, we save a half a second on our pit stop. It's the same feeling. It's just you made it better. You have a better advantage. So it's just one of the pieces. It's not like, oh, I want to, I never got that gotcha kind of feeling. It's like, okay, good. Nobody noticed, or they noticed, but there wasn't a rule against it. So I read the rules good and I got an advantage on my competition because they didn't realize that loophole was in the rule. So for me, it was never a us against them thing. It was just, how do I go faster? How do I make my car better? And if I could interpret the rule and take advantage of that, it was like, I thought, and sometimes you learn stuff and it backfires. Another Indy story. I'm looking at the rules and we're going to qualify again. And I was actually running Michele Alboreto. Must have been 96.
We've talked about this. The Italian Formula One driver, right?
Italian Formula One driver, done 200 Formula One races, nearly won the world championship for Ferrari. Came and wanted to do Indy because he was going to go racing for himself because he wanted to run the Indy 500.
Yeah.
Think back in the day, Alonso. Alonso came, he wanted to do the Indy 500.
Yeah.
Michele wanted to do Indy 500. So I got the good fortune of being his engineer. And one day, I don't know how I came up with it, but we're going to go qualifying. And I knew the mirror thing had been blown. I'd used that years before. So I'm thinking about it. And I'm thinking, I looked through the rules and it said some obscure rule like you must have brakes on the car or something like that. I'm like, yeah, all right. What happens if we just qualify with one brake, like just the right rear caliper, and we take all the other calipers off? That would save weight, save unsprung weight, which is important. And then I thought, well, heck, if we're going to take the calipers off, why don't we take the rotors, the discs, the brake discs off too? Because they spin and that's energy. You got to start them up and slow them down and all of that. We'll take the brake rotors off too. And I thought, let's try it. So, because that nobody could, with the wheels on, nobody could really see. And so we set the car up that way to go out and practice. And Michele drives out of pit lane and he goes through turn 1 and 2 and he goes through like 3 and 4 kind of at a moderate speed. He's just kind of warming up and he comes straight in the pits. He goes, nope, this will not work. This thing is going to kill me.
Really?
I'm like, why can it kill you? And suddenly I'm starting to think about it. And Michele says the steering wheel feels like it's the most nervous, precise, like you can't even think about turning it like a half a degree and the thing just darts back and forth and up. Da, da, da,
Oh
da.
my God. Was it gyroscopic? Was that, you're kidding?
Exactly. I didn't even think about it. I was like, oh, what an idiot I am. You got these giant rotors. They were carbon, but still they're spinning at however many RPM going 230 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, that's like that old gyroscopic precession thing, the old toy gyroscope that you turn in your hand and it always doesn't want to let you turn it. We didn't have that anymore. And so the car handled horrible. I mean, maybe we could have come up with it would have taken us a month to come up with a setup for a one brake car. But I was trying to found the loophole in the rule, but I wasn't smart enough to think it all the way through.
God,
so we didn't race that. We didn't qualify.
That never would have occurred to me. I never would have thought about that. But it makes sense because, bicycles, motorcycles, scooters, the smaller the wheel goes, the wheel is a gyroscope. Each wheel on a motorcycle is a gyroscope. And the smaller the wheels go, the more unstable the thing is.
Yep.
I never thought about rotors being being gyroscopes at each corner. And at Indy, where you're a weight on a string, just man.
Yep.
So what, it's possible because that was a quality and practice thing. You weren't going to try and run in the race, right?
No. We were just gonna qualify on it because it's a spool rear end, which is like a solid axle. There's no differential in the car at Indy. So all you have to do is slow down one of the rear. When he comes in the pits, obviously after qualifying, he needs to slow down and stop. But one brake would be fine. You could slow it down, come to a stop. I thought I was like super brilliant, and it turned out I was super dumb. I didn't even think of that.
What did it feel like when you realized you were super dumb?
Normal.
Well, Sam, every day I wake up and I look in the mirror, and it's that.
That's that.
Right. Wow, you sound like a journalist. Okay, so when those things happen, the older I get, the shorter the refractory time from a screw up gets, right? When you're very young, it can be very difficult you make a mistake and you sit there. And I've always been terrible at this. I beat myself up whenever I screw up. And, these days it's a lot shorter than it used to be. It's, a matter of sometimes 5 seconds, sometimes, realistically, sometimes it's still whole days because I'm a moron. But I can remember in high school, sometimes things would occupy me for a whole day when I would screw up. And when you have something like that and you're in an environment as high pressure and intense as the month of May, how do you have to, when something doesn't work, what's the refractory time from hell, we have to figure something else out? Like, did you spend 2 seconds? Was it interesting that when you figure, because it's compelling when you figure out why, right? The gyroscope thing was like a light bulb in your brain. Was it compelling and interesting when you figured it out? Or was it just like, screw it. Okay, well, how long before you moved on to the next thing?
Probably, you said 2 seconds. I was going to go, no, less than that, for sure. Less than that. It was like, all right, that didn't work. Again, almost like, okay, we tried stiffer front anti-roll bar. And the driver goes, nope, no, that's worse. All right, on to the next thing. You have this list of things. And I've always been, my mentor guy that I've talked to a lot on this podcast, Steve Johnson, always said, if you find something that doesn't work, move on to the next thing and worry about why it didn't work later, but find out why. And so that was kind of it. It's like, I don't even know when I came up with the gyroscopic thing. It seems real obvious now, but when he said the steering wheel was real light, I was like, okay, there's something going. Yeah, I wonder if it's like that. But immediately on to, okay, crew, put the brake rotors and the calipers back on. We're going to try that ride height change we were going to do. And we just moved on.
That's such a profession. I love the fact that that's how anybody in any profession works. After you have enough seat time and enough problem solving, I sitting here thinking about it, like that's how my head works in media, in writing, in storytelling, in television, in whatever the hell it is that I'm paid to do.
Mm-hmm.
The flip is always very quick, but it's only in the personal stuff that's hobbies. I don't play sports because I basically build like a drunken giraffe, but I play instruments and I club race and I do all these other things in the rest of my life where it's so difficult to take that quick flip, like, oh, hey, this didn't work. It's so difficult to flip on the personal side of things because you're just invested in it differently and there's different stuff at stake.
Yeah. It's that's the thing about rules. And we're doing a whole podcast on cheating and rules and stuff, but it's just one aspect. You look at the global thing as a race engineer of how I can make my car go faster.
Right.
Ross, one of the tools I can use is a guy like Ross. Okay, Ross, make my driver go faster. I need help. And that's one of the things you have. You have the mechanics, you have aerodynamics, you have wind tunnels, you have data, you have One thing is the rule book. And sometimes, I know lots of guys do this, I'm sure. I read the rule book and I don't read it for what you can't do. Sometimes the rule book even helps you think about things you could do. Because if they're writing 5 pages about something you're not supposed to do,
yeah,
you might go, wow, that must be really important. If I could figure out a way to do that, what they're trying to prevent me to do, I bet that's probably pretty good because they're writing a whole rule about not allowing me to do that. And so you start to look at ways that maybe, okay, if the rule doesn't allow you to do this, maybe you could do this other thing that's kind of like that, but isn't really in the rules or isn't spelled out as much.
But it also touches on the one thing that most people don't know about professional motorsport and really any kind of professional competition, whether it's, from Wimbledon all the way on down to, your local tennis pro, any chunk of anything where people, it is their business to do better and win and beat somebody else. So much of what underpins your decision making, what underpins the structure of competition, what underpins the choices you make, it all ends up being built on banal details. It's not big, sexy stuff like Smokey Yunick putting a fuel line in the car the size of your arm or building a 3/4 scale Trans Am car, whatever it was. It's always the little tiny things, and the push to pass is a good example of that. But it's there are a dozen, hundreds of stories in the business where somebody did something illegal and it comes out, and you're like, man, the tiny stuff makes a difference, and it's almost never sexy. So
nope. There was a rule in SCCA runoffs on a Sports 2000 where they had some kind of clutch rule. But the rule, and it was describing everything about the clutch, but never in there did it say you had to have a clutch. And so we just took the clutch out and basically direct drive. We put a big dowel in there and we just basically direct drove our Sports 2000 engine to the car. It had no clutch. You had to push it to get it started because the motor wouldn't turn the whole car and drive it. So we were at Road Atlanta and we purposely got a garage at the top of the hill. If you've ever been to Road Atlanta, people are listening. There's some garages at the very top of the hill. We got a garage there. So for each practice, we could push it down the hill and bump start it. And then we would stop in the pit lane and the tow truck would have to tow us back to we didn't have a golf cart that could get us up the hill, had to tow us back up to the garage. And we ran that whole thing, won the runoffs. They took the car apart and they went, you don't pass the clutch rules. And we said, it doesn't say you have to have a clutch. And they went, you're right. There's a lot of rules about how big it has to be, heavy, what size, how many plates, and everything else. But it never says you actually have to have a clutch.
And for those who don't know, what car was this? What was it?
It was a Sports 2000, a Lola. It was Steve Johnson again, my friend Steve Johnson. He called it a SR71, which was his highly modified Lola 590 Sports 2000.
Sports twos are cool, but so for those who don't know, a sports two, like a lot of club racing cars, a lot of purpose-built club racing cars, has a dog gearbox in it that you can shift without the clutch. So you really only need the clutch for starts and moving around the paddock, and or if you spin it and have to restart the thing and stall it.
Right.
So I guess the point was tell Steve not to stall it, not to end
Right.
up in the
don't stall it. And we just kind of jammed it in gear and away we went. And we didn't have to spin that big heavy.
Yeah.
Back in the days, we didn't have carbon clutches. So it was a big heavy, I don't know, 6-8 inch clutch. So you didn't have to spin it around. And we got in ahead, an extra 5 horsepower on everybody. And
it's it. I remember the first time I tried a dog box, and just the fact that it was the weirdest sensation, because you spend your entire life in road cars thinking, okay, well, if you shift without the clutch, like, it's not bad, but you're probably going to hurt stuff. And the fact that, like, the moment you breathe out of the throttle, just a smidge, it's almost like the gearbox spits the lever into neutral, and there's a window where you can just, like, in fractions of a second, the shift is done, and it's just boom, boom, and it sucks it in, and it's done, and it feels exactly the way it's supposed to work, and it's just a neat sensation. But I mean, what do you think a clutch, the pressure plate, and the release bearing and everything weighed on that thing? In rotating mass.
Oh man, 5 pounds.
That's a lot.
Least,
yeah,
5 pounds, and you got to spin that.
Yeah,
and you got to slow it down and speed it up. It was Steve said the motor was whatever, zippy, peppy. It was like, instead of vroom, vroom, it was a boom, boom, boom. I mean, it was because you didn't have to get the momentum of that clutch going.
Right. Well, it's like taking 5 pounds off a flywheel.
Right.
So, okay. So the third category is, we have to keep going, because all I want to do is pull each one of these categories and do an entire show, which we'll probably do at some point. But the third category was cheating. But everyone's doing it, so you do it just to keep up. So what's on the tip of your tongue there?
Well, I'll tell the main one. So I was racing ASA cars with Alan Kowicki. Alan was a childhood friend. I grew up with him in Wisconsin. He ended up being NASCAR Cup champion. He was the Underbird and the Thunderbird, and Alan Kowicki went on to the success that he had always dreamed of. But him and I grew up racing go-karts together. We his dad didn't like him racing, and somehow Alan got a go-kart, somehow, I don't know. And my dad was we would always swing by his house and pick up his go-kart on the way to the go-kart track, and then Alan would kind of race with us. And so I've known him for years and years and years. We're racing ASA cars, which ASA is I don't know, it was kind of the step below the second step in NASCAR. So to give you an example, in those days, it was the mid 80s. ASA was, the drivers were Alan Kowicki, Rusty Wallace, Mark Martin, Jody Ridley, guys who went on to be NASCAR champions. It was the best short track stock car racing in the country. They used to have another division in the South called All Pro and ASA, and they would all come together for a big race at the end of the year to decide the best short track stock car racer in the country. So it was pretty high level. These guys were probably on their way to NASCAR, as it turned out. Mark Martin and Alan and Rusty Wallace. Did Mark Martin ever win a Cup championship? Anyway, they were big Cup stars coming out of ASA.
Yeah.
So we're racing in Canada, Cayuga, Canada. I remember what city in this time. Racing at a little quarter-mile track in Cayuga. And it was one of those tracks where there was no bridge or tunnel. So you pulled in with your hauler, parked in the middle, and you were stuck there until the racing stopped, and then you could go across the track. And we had noticed that in the races previous to this, let me back up. They didn't do tech after the races. They did tech before the race. They said you had to go through inspection before you went out to the grid. And so you went through inspection, weight, they had a ride height rule, how high the car had to be off the ground at the front and the rear. They had weight percentages. You could only have so much of your weight on the left side of the car because they didn't want you to have too much weight on the left side because that was a big advantage. They checked your carburetor. They checked make sure your restrictors were in place, and they checked everything before the race. And then you went across that and you went out to the grid, and then there was officials around all the time, so couldn't mess with it. After the race, they figured, well, you were legal. You didn't make a pit stop and change your carburetor in the middle of the race, so your carburetor's fine and everything's going to be fine. They never inspected after the race back then. But we noticed, just looking at cars, that during the race or on a pit stop when they would set them down, a lot of cars seemed way lower than ours. And we were like, they can't be meeting this minimum ride height rule. And everybody knows lower is better. You get the center of gravity down, it handles better, it uses your tires less, and it goes faster. So it's a big advantage. And we're like, oh man, how are they doing that? We knew they were, quote, cheating or using a gray area, or somehow they were doing that, but we couldn't even figure out how to do it. But if we could, we're like, we're doing it because everybody else is, and we're just getting our butt kicked here because they got a much lower car. So the way our car worked was we had the lower wishbone was like a flat, it wasn't tubular, it was like a flat box style wishbone that went under the main frame rail and picked up inside by the engine, almost by the engine block. And so this flat wishbone there was a gap between the frame rail and the wishbone where the wishbone passed under it. And we thought, well, what we'll do is we'll jack our car up. We'll put some wooden pegs, like a wooden dowel, put some wooden pegs in between the wishbone and the frame, set the car down, and now that will essentially hold the frame up. That peg in there will hold the frame up. And then when those pegs fall out, the car will lower down to the ground. So we'll go through tech inspection with those pegs in there holding the frame up. They'll check our ride heights and they'll go, yep, you're good. We'll go down, we'll go to the grid. Our car is nice and high. Everybody else is looking at everybody's car going, yep, they all look good. And then we'll go out on the front straightaway and we'll do we're warming up our tires, right? We're scrub our tires. So we turn hard left and the right peg falls out. We turn hard right and the left peg falls out.
Mm-hmm.
And the car goes poof, down on the ground. But they're not going to check us after the race. So we're probably fine. And we're like, oh, that's cheating. But we're like, everybody else is doing it too. We can see it. We can see on the pit stops. They drive down pit lane. They're way lower than us. We don't know how they're doing it, but this is how we're going to do it. So we go ahead and we do this for qualifying. We go for qualifying. Boom, car goes down. Handles great. I don't know where we qualified. Nothing special because everybody else was somehow cheating too. And we're thinking maybe they have some kind of they're on their shock absorber, they're like pinning it somehow. And we could not figure out how they were doing this, but we had our way. And so at the end of the day, qualifying day, Alan grabs his briefcase. I grab my briefcase. We're walking out of the track as you have to because there's no tunnel. And we're walking through turn one. Over the track, you got out like on the outside of turn one. We're walking from the pit area across by turn one, and it's kind of dark and dusky. It's almost completely dark, but not quite. And Alan stops me and he goes, "Uh-oh." I said, "What?" He goes, "Look over there." And he kind of looks his eyes over, and there's one of our pegs sitting on the apron of the racetrack. He's like, oh. And he kind of, and there's a lot of guys are leaving, right? Because it's like the day's over and it's not just us. There's like a group of people leaving. And Alan kind of walks down there a little bit and he gives his foot a kick and he kicks the thing over. And I'm standing right next to him. He kicks the thing over into the infield. And we both look over there and there's like 40 of these pegs. And we're like, aha, okay. Now we know. And we walked out of there. Of course, everybody else was doing exactly the
The
same
same
thing
thing.
with the pegs. We were just 2 races late.
I it, it's it touches on that notion, right? That there there are moments, and I've met countless people in the sport who have said something along these lines, but there are moments when you know that you shouldn't do a thing, whether that is, cheat in the way that everybody's cheating, or hit somebody back because they hit you, or,
Right.
you know, punt somebody off the track because they did something to you 3 races ago, whatever the hell it is. But there are moments where you know you shouldn't do a thing, and the voice in your head says, do the thing. And then you have that weird little conversation about everything that the sport means to you, and everything that these people are doing for you, and what's at stake, and all that happens, in the flash of an instant, and you make the decision to do it. But is there, like, when you decided to do that, was there any voice in your head that said, oh, the moral struggle is real? Or, you sit around and think, this is actually wrong, and I mean, it's right, but it's also wrong, but that's how it works. Like, did that ever come up? Does it? Because some people it does. Some people it's situational.
I think each situation is different. In that case with me and Alan, it was me and Alan's team, and we knew we didn't think, and we weren't like, oh, I think we're not very good, but they must be cheating, so we're going to cheat. It wasn't that. We could see that their cars were lower somehow, so we were going to do the same thing. There's a couple. I approach it a little differently today when those moral, like you said, Sam, the moral struggle or the moral like consequences, and how do you deal with that? I approach it differently today. We're in a situation where there's oftentimes sponsors, their reputation, a team owner's reputation, a team owner's business's reputation
Yeah.
on the line. And then there's, so if we ever get to a situation where we think everybody is doing it, my current way of handling that is 2 ways. First, if the best way I feel is I will go to the rules makers and ask them for clarification,
Okay.
because I really don't care if I don't really care what the rule is, as long as I know that my competitors are being held to that exact same rule and complying with that rule.
Right.
I'll comply with it fine. And I have a big enough ego to think I can beat them on setup, drive air, pit crew, strategy, all the things you're supposed to beat them on. So I'm happy if I'm absolutely 100% confident that nobody's getting away with something. And I'm fine with that. And then I don't go looking for some way to get away with something else. So what I'll do is if I think if I think 3 or 4 teams are doing something that I think is illegal, rather than go to the organizers and tech officials and say, hey, that guy's doing an illegal thing. You don't want to be that guy. I will say, hey, can you, are you checking? I'll go back to my old example. Are you checking ride height, all, consistently and accurately? And they'll go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'll go, well, if you're not, I'm going to, because it seems like some people are getting away with something, and it might be because you're not checking it. And so I'd like to do the same thing as them. And then what it does is it kind of plants that, oh, really? And suddenly that weekend, it seems like they start checking that thing, that somebody's brought to their attention. And so, and I'm fine with that. As long as nobody's getting away with something that I'm not, I'm fine with that. The other thing is then, if you decide that you're going to do something like that, that's gray area, everybody else is doing it, you have to not, you can't be the guy. As a race engineer, it's not my team. I'm not sponsoring it. There's a lot more at stake than oh, he got caught cheating. So you have to talk to your team manager, team owner, team sponsor, whoever stands to be highly embarrassed by if it all goes sideways. And so most of the times those guys are like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. Do not do that. We're not cheating. We're not going to press the rules here. And then there are some sanctioning bodies where you say, hey, let me ask you this. I'd like to do this. Can I do this? And here's what I had this happen at Daytona this year, and I won't give the exact examples, but we had something that was maybe we weren't quite sure whether it was legal, and it really wasn't a cheating thing, but it was a thing where it would give us a little advantage in practice so that we could try some changes faster than normal. And I went to the rules guys and I said, straight out, I brought the part. I said, can we do this? And they looked at the rules and said, yeah, you can do that. And so if they would have said no, we wouldn't have used it. But we asked them, and they don't go blabbing to everybody else, hey, the whole field, these guys are doing this, and you can do it too. They're like, they give you credit for being smart and looking at that rule. And they might write a rule that clarifies that later. But so even the rules makers now, and I'm doing this in a broad way, I would say the IMSA rules makers have been really fair with this kind of a thing. If you come up with something, they will say, oh yeah, well, we really wish that wasn't the intent of the rule, but you can do that. And let me give you a quick example. This will, I think, explain it to everybody. They have a recon lap in IMSA where you go out. Basically, it's just to get everybody to get from their pit box around to the grid and line up in grid position. And it's not worth anything other than just drive around and getting everybody in position. I wanted to scrub tires scrub, not get them hot, but just take the shiny. People have probably seen like the Formula One tires nowadays. They leave and they're like, look like they have a gloss finish on them. And that doesn't make much grip.
Right.
So I wanted to scrub, get that gloss finish off of an extra set of tires. A lot of times we'll do it in practice because you can get a better outlap and when you put those tires on if they got that shiny off. So I needed one more set. So I looked at the rules and I went to the rules makers at IMSA and I asked them what I was going to do. And they went, no, you could do that. So what it was is the rule said on the grid, you can only change tires from dry tires to wet tires or from wet tires to dry tires. The intent was not to be able to change from one set of wets to another or from one set of dry tires to another set. That was the intent of the rule. So what I did is I went out on a brand new set of tires, scrubbed them on the recon lap, came to the box, to the grid. And normally what I need to do is put on my qualifying tires because you have to start on your qualifying tires.
Okay.
So then I would have had to put on my qualifying tires, but you can't do that because you can't change from a dry set to a dry set. So what I did is took the scrub tires off, put a set of rain tires on it, which is legal from dry to rain, sat there for 2 minutes, took pictures to make sure that everybody saw that.
I see where this is going.
Jacked it back up, took the wet tires off, put the other set, the qualifying set of dry tires on, because you can change from dry to wet, and set the car down.
How did nobody say anything? How did nobody care?
Oh, one of our competitors went totally ballistic. and then came to me after that and said, that was really clever. That was awesome. He was like impressed. He's like, God, that was good. That was really good thinking. And he's like, I should have thought of that.
Is there another Jeff rule that now just says you can only change one set of tires on the grid? I mean, like, where does that go? I mean, because
there is a rule now. The rule says you must do the recon lap on your race start tires.
Well, on that note, the worst part is we'll do this again because I can't get enough of this stuff. At some point, the other thing I want to do is do an entire show on NASCAR cheats, and then a show after that on NASCAR cheats, and a show after that on NASCAR cheats.
Right.
But we'll probably end up using some guests for that because we know some people who can help us out there. And that's just fantastic. But unfortunately, we're out of time. And that is our show. As always, thank you for listening. We appreciate you, and we're really glad you're here. We're not glad Ross isn't here. We like Ross. We miss Ross. He will be back next week, unless, of course, he does not come back from Watkins Glen, which would be totally understandable because Watkins Glen is great. And in that case, I don't know, Jeff and I will probably get on a plane to Seattle and steal his Lotus and then totally regret it, because that's what happens when you bring a Lotus into your life. It's joy and pain.
I like that idea.
Yeah, you like that. It says a man who's never owned a Lotus.
Right.
Speaking of joy and pain is what my wife tells me is what happens when anyone listens to me. So on that note, thank you again for listening. And Jeff, unless you have anything else, we'll see everybody next time.
Have fun.
Thanks. Have a good day, guys.